Welcome to Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we're just going to take a few minutes to introduce some vital information about the Caribbean. And that is, if you take the Caribbean here, we've already discussed Cuba a little bit, and we sort of discussed Puerto Rico. We'll discuss it a little bit more. But we have not discussed the rest of the Caribbean. What's going on with them? Well, first thing is they start to demand independence, especially after the 1930s. They're not going to get it in the 1930s. As you see, World War II, well, you don't see, well, you probably know this. World War II is going to weaken the power of the British and the French to retain hold of their colonies. So post-World War II sees this great independence movement in the post-colonial system in which all these colonies start to rule themselves. They start to get independence. So that's what's going to happen to the Caribbean as well, because they didn't get independent a century earlier. Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, British colonies, they start agitating for and get their independence. Barbados, Guyana, the Bahamas, Grenada, all of these places are going to start and get their independence. Belize used to be called British Honduras, and they changed their name to Belize. It's still going to be, Guatemala still argues that it's part of Guatemala, but this country gets its independence, but they're still part of the British Commonwealth, so they still have a prime minister, but they're still part of that Commonwealth system. All right, they continue to export items, in some places sugar, but other things as well, right? They only have a couple items that they can export, but the problem with the Caribbean is that it's made up of a whole bunch of small islands, and they, even though it's mostly rural, people are living in the countryside, there's not a lot of big cities, but they don't have a lot of major exports that they can sell. Cuba did, yeah, because they had lots of big lands. Jamaica did, but not some of the smaller islands. So a lot of the things that they export is actually people. A lot of people are leaving the Caribbean. Millions come to the United States. Others come to closer countries like the Central America, South America, and some go to Europe, but especially to the United States. A lot of people are coming. Foreign companies are going to dominate industries there, especially if you think about it. There are a lot of people, but there's not a lot of jobs, not a lot of exports. Haiti, for example, is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. So what they could do is take advantage of all the people that are living there and exploit the labor. So, for example, when I was growing up in the 80s, we have all these boom boxes. Where are they assembled, right? They're assembled in the Caribbean, right? By taking advantage of all this cheap labor. Some of the big countries, Haiti, had got independence in 1804. I already said that it's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. When you are as poor as Haiti, perhaps it's just coincidence, but the problem is that you are ripe for military dictatorships. You'll do whatever you need to, whatever you can in order to solve the economic problem. Even though they have two military dictators, the father and the son, from 1957 to 1986, and 1985. Remember, around that period is when the military dictatorships step down and democracy comes in throughout Latin America. Same thing here, in this case 1986, but they still continue to be one of the poorest countries. And the earthquake that happened in the early 2010s did not really help things very much at all. Puerto Rico. What is Puerto Rico? As I speak, they're having economic problems, a great deal of economic problems, but they are still part of the United States. They are a territory. They still haven't officially become a state yet. I remember when I was as an undergrad, my professor argued that it's because we're still racist and we don't want a state that has a different language other than English as a primary language coming in. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's still not a state. In 1954, it became a commonwealth, and then, of course, it's now a territory. Another great countries, Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is the remainder of the Hispaniola, right? Haiti, this western part was called French Domain, taken over and then got its independence. What about the eastern half, Dominican Republic? Economically, it has done much better than Haiti, but it's still problematic. They had a dictator. That dictator came to power in the 1930s, just like so many dictators did, Rafael Trujillo. But unlike most countries where they stepped down in 1945 after the Second World War, this dictator simply remained in power. If you want to watch a great movie about this, I think it's a great movie anyway. I like the book much better. It's called In the Time of the Butterflies, starring Selma Hayek. I think it's a great way that they transitioned from a book to a movie. Anyway, so he's a military dictator in 1961. It's a story about three, in the Time of the Butterfly, a story about three sisters. The movie is really about just one sister, but three sisters that fight against this dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. What they don't show in the movie, maybe I'm letting the cat out of the bag, spoiling the movie, is that he's going to be assassinated in 1969, and somebody else is going to come to power, a guy by the name of Juan Bosch. JFK said this is a great thing, but unfortunately, he's going to be overthrown by the Trujillo military, right? So this guy is a communist. We can't let a communist run our country, so they overthrew him. Well, remember that it's not just the Caribbean, but Caribbean especially. When you have the economic situation as it was, then it is ripe for military dictatorships. Juan Bosch, he had been elected president. He had been overthrown by the dictatorship, by the military. He wants to come back as president. He has some great ideas. So he tries by force to come back. LBJ does not like this one whatsoever. Remember that LBJ it's during his presidency that the declaration comes about that we don't care if you're a military dictatorship or a democracy as long as you protect our twin pursuits of trade and security. So LBJ dispatches 23,000 troops to the Dominican Republic to put down this attempted overthrow by Juan Bosch. He is eventually going to come back to power 4 years later, and this is what he's going to say, though. He's going to say, representative democracy cannot work in a country such as the Dominican Republic. So he's not radical anymore. He's just kind of a conservative, doesn't think that we can have change anymore. What happened to your idealism that you had before? It's gone. It has served to maintain the privileges of a minority of property and wealth, and it has not provided the stability, personal safety, healthcare, and education that the majority want. True that it did not supply these, but is that democracy or is that something else? Representative democracy has been a failure in Latin America for more than 150 years. It cannot guarantee true equality for all men since it is fundamentally unjust sociopolitical system which is organized and sustained by the principle that there are men who have the right to exploit and there are others whose duty it is to allow themselves to be exploited. Well, I guess he does not like representative democracy anymore. He wants to have a dictatorship but with popular support. That would be called populism, right? Say, for example, the Estado Novo in Brazil. All right, super quickly, I just wanted to introduce a couple of things, and that is the Caribbean. The Caribbean gets its independence after World War II, with the exception of the countries that are already independent. Those countries are going to see Haiti, Dominican Republic, especially economic woes, problems. Haiti is going to remain today the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Dominican Republic, not nearly as poor. However, it is still fraught with many problems associated with, as you saw, representative democracy. So that is the Caribbean in less than 15 minutes.